They said the cabin didn't belong there, like a scar in the middle of something polished and expensive, but scars don't disappear just because people stop looking at them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Because this story might sound familiar in ways you don't expect. The night air over Pine Ridge Estates carried the faint scent of pine and chlorine, drifting from manicured lawns and heated pools. The kind of place where every house stood tall and clean, wrapped in glass and white stone, each one worth more than a lifetime of quiet work, except for one. At the edge of the neighborhood, where the paved road gave way to gravel and stubborn weeds pushed through the cracks, stood a cabin no bigger than 600 square feet, its wood darkened by years of weather, its porch slightly tilted like it had learned to endure instead of impress, and beside it, a man worked in silence. Daniel Hayes didn't look like the rest of them, not in the way his flannel shirt carried the smell of sawdust instead of cologne, not in the way his hands moved with purpose instead of ease, not in the way his eyes stayed distant even when the world around him tried to pull him back. He measured a plank twice, cut once, the sound sharp and steady in the quiet evening, while a German shepherd sat nearby, alert but calm, amber eyes tracking everything, missing nothing. Ranger didn't bark at the passing cars or the laughter echoing from the houses uphill, but his ears shifted when voices drifted down, louder than they needed to be. "You see that place?" someone said, followed by a low chuckle. "Looks like it crawled out of the woods and forgot to leave." And the laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it carried, the kind that lingers longer than it should. Daniel didn't look up, not right away, but his grip tightened just enough to feel it, the old weight pressing somewhere behind his ribs, the kind that didn't come from words, but from memory. Ranger stood then, slow and deliberate, stepping closer to the edge of the property, not aggressive, just present, his gaze steady on the silhouettes up the hill, as if he understood something Daniel chose not to react to. The sky above was turning a deep blue, the last light stretching thin across the rooftops, and for a moment, everything felt still, almost peaceful, if you ignored the way the wind shifted, carrying something faint, something out of place. Daniel paused, just for a second, head tilting slightly, as if listening to something beneath the surface, something most people would miss, but Ranger didn't miss it. His ears snapped forward, body tensing, nose lifting into the air, drawing in a scent that didn't belong to pine or fresh-cut grass. He took a step toward the tree line beyond the cabin, then another, a low sound forming in his chest. Not a bark, not yet, just a warning waiting to be understood. Daniel noticed, of course he did, because he always noticed when Ranger changed, when the quiet shifted into something sharper, something urgent. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, voice low, steady, the way you speak when you're not sure if you're asking a question or already bracing for the answer. Up the hill, music started, something bright and careless, blending with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of sound that fills space without ever really listening back. But down here, near the cabin that didn't belong, the air felt different, heavier somehow, like it was holding its breath. Ranger moved again, faster this time, circling once before stopping at the edge of the trees, staring into the growing darkness as if he could see something coming long before anyone else would even think to look. And Daniel followed his gaze, the quiet between them stretching, not empty, but waiting, like the beginning of something no one up there was ready for. The wind did not rise all at once. It crept in low and steady, slipping between the trees like something searching for a way through, and Daniel felt it before he fully understood it. The way a man who has lived through too many long nights learns to recognize when silence is not peace, but warning. Ranger stood frozen at the edge of the tree line, his body angled forward, every muscle alert, his tail still, his ears cutting through the quiet like antennas tuned to something unseen. And then he exhaled, slow and controlled, as if confirming what his instincts had already decided. Daniel stepped closer, boots pressing into the dry earth, the scent of sap and dust thick in the air, but beneath it there was something else now, faint but unmistakable, a sharpness that did not belong to wood or soil, something that lingered just enough to make his chest tighten. He glanced back toward the houses uphill where laughter still drifted, brighter now, louder, a party beginning to swell under string lights and polished glass, people moving freely with drinks in hand. unaware of how fragile comfort can be when it rests on things that have never been tested. Ranger let out a low sound again, not loud, not desperate, just firm, a line, drawn between what was and what was coming. And Daniel crouched beside him, resting a hand briefly against the thick fur along his neck, grounding himself in something real, something that had never lied to him. "You smell it too," he said quietly, not as a question but as recognition, and Ranger shifted his weight, eyes still locked forward, as if waiting for permission or perhaps waiting for Daniel to catch up. The trees beyond them moved slightly, not from any strong gust, just enough to whisper against each other, leaves brushing in a rhythm that felt off, like a heartbeat skipping when it should not. And Daniel straightened, scanning the horizon, noticing how the light had changed, not darker exactly, but dimmed in a way that flattened everything, as if the evening had decided to end early. He had seen that kind of shift before, not here, not in places like this where everything was designed to feel safe, but elsewhere, where the ground did not promise anything and the sky could turn without warning. Up the hill, a man raised his glass and pointed down toward the cabin again, drawing attention, more laughter following, someone mimicking the shape of the tilted porch with exaggerated gestures. And for a moment Daniel watched them, really watched them, the ease in their posture, the certainty that nothing outside their world could reach them, and he felt no anger, not the kind that burns, just a quiet distance, like looking at something already fading. Ranger turned his head then, just slightly, enough to meet Daniel's eyes, and in that brief exchange there was no confusion, no hesitation, only a shared understanding that whatever was approaching did not care about property lines or opinions. It would come the same way it always does, indifferent, unannounced, and complete. Daniel nodded once, a small motion, but final, and he stood. Fully now, his movements shifting from routine to preparation, the kind that does not rush but does not waste a second either. He walked back toward the cabin, already thinking through what needed to be done, checking the latch on the storm shutters, the generator tucked beneath the side awning, the water barrels he had filled weeks ago, without any clear reason other than habit and a feeling he could never quite explain. Ranger followed close, but every few steps he looked back toward the trees, as if counting seconds, as if measuring distance. And the air continued to change, growing heavier, pressing down in a way that made even the simplest breath feel deliberate. Inside the cabin, the light was warm, steady, untouched by whatever shift was happening outside, and Daniel paused at the doorway for just a moment, glancing once more toward the hill where the music had grown louder, the glow of patio lights flickering against polished windows, and then he stepped in, closing the door. Halfway, not to shut the world out, but to be ready when it finally came knocking. The first thing that changed was the silence, not the kind that settles gently at the end of a long day, but the kind that arrives all at once, like the world itself paused mid-breath and forgot how to exhale. Daniel noticed it as he secured the last latch on the window, his fingers still for just a moment longer than necessary, his eyes lifting toward the ceiling as if the answer might be written somewhere in the quiet. And Ranger felt it even sooner, his head snapping toward the door, ears rigid, body angled as if listening to something far beyond the reach of human hearing. Outside, the music from the hill faltered, not stopping completely, but breaking unevenly, like a record skipping on a worn groove, laughter turning into scattered voices, confused, uncertain, and then the wind shifted again, stronger now, carrying that same sharp scent but heavier, closer, no longer something distant and easy to ignore. Daniel moved without hesitation, crossing the small space of the cabin, in steady steps, flipping a switch that brought a low hum to life beneath the floor, the generator answering like an old friend that never needed to be asked twice, and the warm light inside held steady even as the shadows outside stretched and twisted. Against the walls, Ranger paced once, twice, then stopped at the door, his nose pressed near the gap where wood met frame, drawing in every detail, every signal, his chest rising slower now, more controlled, like a soldier waiting for the exact moment to act. Daniel watched him, not questioning, not doubting, because there had been too many times when ignoring that instinct cost more than it should, and he reached for the shelf above the counter, pulling down a flashlight, checking it with a quick click before setting it within reach. the beam cutting briefly through the dim edges of the room. The air inside the cabin felt different now, insulated but not untouched, like a barrier holding for the moment but aware of its limits. And Daniel took a slow breath, steadying himself, his mind moving through quiet calculations, distance, time, what could reach here and what could not, what would hold and what would fail. Up the hill, lights flickered, one by one, not all at once, but enough to be noticed. Bright patios dimming, then glowing again, voices rising louder now, no longer carefree, carrying a sharp edge that had not been there before, and a car alarm chirped somewhere in the distance, a short, uncertain sound that cut through the growing tension. Ranger let out a single bark then, not loud, not frantic, just enough to break the moment, and Daniel turned toward the door, his hand hovering near the handle, not opening it yet, just feeling the presence of the outside world through the thin layer of wood, the way a man feels the ocean through the hull of a boat. The wind pushed harder now, brushing against the cabin in uneven bursts, rattling something loose near the porch, and the trees beyond creaked softly, their branches shifting in patterns that no longer felt random, but guided by something building, something inevitable. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving Ranger space, and the dog moved forward immediately, positioning himself between the door and the room, not out of fear, but out of purpose, his body forming a quiet line of defense that did not need to be commanded. For a brief second, everything aligned, the silence, the scent, the shifting light, and Daniel felt it clearly now, the moment just before change, the edge where one world ends and another begins, and he closed his eyes. For half a heartbeat, not in doubt, but in acceptance. When he opened them again, the first knock had not come yet, but it was already on its way. The knock came softer than expected, not the desperate pounding Daniel had imagined, but a hesitant sound, like someone unsure if they were still welcome anywhere at all. And for a moment neither he nor Ranger moved, the space between sound and response stretching thin, fragile, until Ranger stepped forward first, placing himself firmly by the door, his presence steady, grounded, as if reminding Daniel that hesitation could cost more than action. Outside, the wind carried voices now, not laughter anymore, but sharp, overlapping fragments of concern, names being called, footsteps moving faster than before, and somewhere up the hill, a light flickered twice before going completely dark, followed by another, and another, like a string of certainty quietly unraveling. The knock came again, slightly louder this time, still controlled, still holding on to some last thread of pride, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand finally resting against the handle, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm, the boundary between two worlds reduced to something as simple as a door. Ranger glanced back at him, just once, not urging, not questioning, only present, and Daniel understood that look, the same one that had carried them through nights far heavier than this, the kind that said trust what is in front of you, not what was said before. He opened the door halfway, not wide, just enough to see, and the air that slipped inside was different now, thicker, edged with that same sharp scent that had been building all evening, closer and more urgent, and standing on the porch was a man Daniel recognized, though not by name, only by posture and tone from earlier laughter, his clean shirt now creased, his expression no longer polished but strained, eyes scanning the interior of the cabin as if searching for something he had never needed before. "Hey," the man said, voice tight, controlled, but not steady. "Something is off up there." And for a second, he glanced back over his shoulder toward the hill, where movement had replaced stillness, silhouettes crossing yards, doors opening and closing, a rhythm of confusion replacing the earlier ease. Daniel did not answer right away, not out of reluctance, but because he was listening, not just to the man, but to everything behind him, the shifting wind, the uneven hum of distant systems failing, the way the night itself felt unsettled, like a surface no longer holding. Ranger stepped closer to the threshold, his nose lifting toward the man, not aggressive, just reading him, confirming what Daniel already sensed, that whatever had driven him down here was real enough to override pride. "Power is flickering," the man continued, words coming faster now. "And there is this smell, like something burning but not quite, and the roads He paused, swallowing. The sentence unfinished but understood, and Daniel nodded once, slow and deliberate, the kind of nod that does not offer comfort, only acknowledgement. Behind the man, a distant voice called his name, louder now, carrying urgency that had not been there before, and he turned halfway, torn between going back and stepping forward. Caught in that moment where decisions begin to matter, Daniel opened the door a little wider then, not an invitation yet, but not a refusal either, and the warm light from inside stretched onto the porch, cutting a clear line between what was stable and what was shifting. Ranger remained at the edge of that line, unmoving, watching, his silence louder than any warning could be, and the man hesitated there, just outside, looking at the cabin he had once laughed at, seeing it now not as something out of place, but as something solid, something that had prepared in ways he had not, and somewhere above them, the last of the music stopped completely, leaving only the wind, the voices, and the growing realization that whatever was coming had already begun. The man did not step inside right away, even with the door open and the warmth reaching him. He lingered on the edge like someone who had spent too long believing he did not need what was now clearly in front of him, and Daniel watched him without pressure, without invitation, just present, while Ranger stood between them, steady as ever, his gaze shifting briefly past the man toward the hill where the world they both came from was beginning to unravel. The wind rose again, not violently, but with purpose, sweeping down from the ridge in long, uneven breaths that carried that same sharp scent, thicker now, threaded with something dry and metallic that clung to the back of the throat, and the man coughed once, more from surprise than discomfort, his composure slipping another inch. "We tried calling it in," he said, voice tighter now, less certain. "But the lines are cutting in and out, and the main road. There is something wrong with the lights down there. They just keep blinking and then going dark." And as if to confirm it, a distant glow flickered at the far end of the neighborhood, dimming in a slow, uneven rhythm before vanishing completely. Daniel nodded again, his eyes lifting briefly beyond the man, scanning the horizon where the trees met the sky, noticing how the color had shifted again, a dull, muted gray pressing down over what should have been a clear night. And he could feel it now, not just in the air, but in the way the ground seemed to hold tension, like something waiting to move. Ranger let out a low breath, stepping forward just enough to brush past the man's leg, not pushing him, not forcing him, just moving through that space with quiet authority, and the man instinctively stepped aside, his eyes following the dog as if recognizing something he could not name. "You should not stay out here," Daniel said finally, his voice calm, even, carrying no trace of accusation, only fact, and the simplicity of it landed heavier than any argument could have. The man hesitated, glancing back once more toward the hill, where more figures were appearing now, moving quickly, some carrying flashlights, others calling out, their voices overlapping in a rising chorus of uncertainty. And for the first time, there was no laughter in it, no distance, just the sound of people realizing that control is often an illusion. He stepped inside then, one foot, then the other, crossing that invisible line with a quiet surrender, and Daniel closed the door behind him, not locking it, not yet, just sealing the space enough to hold what little stability remained. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with another presence, but also steadier, like something designed for this exact moment. The hum of the generator constant, the light unwavering, casting warm shadows across the wood walls that had endured far more than appearances suggested. The man looked around slowly, taking it in, the reinforced beams, the stacked water containers tucked neatly against the wall, the shelves lined with supplies that spoke of preparation rather than poverty, and something in his expression shifted again, not just fear now, but realization, the kind that arrives too late to change what has already been said, but just in time to understand it. "You knew something was coming," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement he was trying to make sense of, and Daniel shook his head slightly, not dismissing it, but not claiming it either. "I knew it could," he replied, the difference subtle, but important. Ranger settled near the door, his body still, angled outward, listening, always listening, and outside, the sounds continued to change, footsteps growing faster, voices sharper, a distant shout carrying clear enough to reach them, followed by another, and another, like signals bouncing through the dark. The man moved toward the small window, peering out, and his breath caught as he watched more of his neighbors making their way down the slope, not in a line, not organized, but drawn by something they could not ignore, their polished certainty replaced by hurried steps and searching eyes, and one by one, their gaze found the same thing in the distance, the cabin that still held light when everything else had begun to dim. Daniel followed that line of sight for a moment, then looked back at Ranger, who did not move, did not react, only remained exactly where he needed to be, and in that stillness, Daniel felt it again, that quiet shift, not of danger alone, but of meaning, as if the night was not just changing the world outside, but the way it would be remembered after. Another sound reached the door then, not a knock this time, but several voices at once, closer now, urgent, and the man inside turned slowly toward Daniel, the last of his earlier confidence gone, replaced by something simpler, something honest, and before he could say anything, Ranger stood, tail low but steady, eyes fixed on the door as the moment they had both been waiting for finally arrived. The voices at the door did not wait for permission this time. They pressed in all at once, overlapping, uneven, carrying the weight of something that had already gone too far to ignore, and Daniel stood still for half a second longer than before, not because he did not understand, but because he did, completely, and understanding has a way of slowing a man down when